Good day, everybody. It's Sunday, October 3rd, in the year of COVID 2021. I'm excited and extremely honored to welcome my good friend Nassim Haramein onto bonus production of Bardcast today. It's number 19 in a continuing series. As you all know, I paused Bardcast productions a couple of months ago in order to focus fully on my upcoming course, The Shakespeare Game, which will be launching very soon on the Resonance Science Foundation, which is the brainchild of my friend and very special guest today, Nassim. Nassim has spent more than 30 years researching and discovering connections in physics, mathematics, geometry, cosmology, quantum mechanics, biology, and chemistry, as well as anthropology and archaeology. These studies have led him to groundbreaking theories, published papers, and patented inventions in unified physics, which are now gaining worldwide recognition and acceptance. He serves as president of Taurus Tech, Arc Crystal and Resonance Science Foundation, established for the research, development, distribution of his technology. Resonance Science Foundation launched the Resonance Academy in 2014. The Academy curriculum is offered in multiple languages with over 100,000 students enrolled from more than 80 countries in an online learning platform that offers Haramein's unified science courses, a 7-module exploration of his groundbreaking work for free. And besides that, though, there are brilliant courses by faculty members, Adam Apollo on quantum geometry, Robert Grant on the language of light, Dr. Lydia Leon on the sacred science of ancient temples, Meredith Sands Keeter on fractal anatomy and geometry of healing, Jamie Janover on ancient Egypt. Yeah, but ancient Egypt like you've never known before. Check him out. Eleanor Bensonoff on holistic wisdom, William Brown on big questions. I love this title. It's a great title for what's really the answer to the universe and everything, but spoiler alert, it's not just simply 42. We got Jonathan Quinton on universal order, and the latest is Aurora Ray on one of my favorite subjects, food. But she's talking quantum healing with raw food, so I'm going to have to check it out. Finally, my own course, The Shakespeare Game, will be launching in a couple of weeks now, so, well, that's if I can stop adding new discoveries to it. I think Nassim knows a thing or two about that. Get it out now! Stop discovering things. But, so, it's a privilege to be featured at Resonance alongside all of these mega-talented presenters, and I hope you will all check it out, because the stunning geometry and math that the bard secretly encoded into his plays and poems has totally unexpected connections to the work of the man that you're about to meet. Now, as most of you know, I always try to create an introductory section that encapsulates the accomplishments and/or core message of my guests. This time, though, it was a real challenge because he's a pioneer who's had to blaze his own unique path. And as you will learn from him today in person, so much work had to be done in complete solitude until he could bring his vision out into the open. I mean, in order to expand on the incomprehensible body of work that was left unfinished by the likes of Einstein and many others, he had to first devote himself to the sort of rigorous study that required utter self-denial. I mean, the guy lived almost 30 years in complete isolation. No, that's not him. That's the other one, Alejandro. No, he didn't live in a cave. No, not there. I heard he lived in a van. Oh, God. Well, look, truth is nobody knew where he lived, but it was remote. And the thing is, he was always studying, and he moved around a lot. He was pretty antisocial. Last anyone heard, he was living with 3 nuns and a dog in the woods, but that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is it took a long time for him to find himself, to get his hypotheses into a coherent state where they could finally be conveyed and rigorously tested. In 2013, he took his masterwork to the Paul Girard Proton Accelerator in Switzerland, and the rest is history. It's such a lot that I decided maybe one of the best ways to communicate it would be with music, poetry, and imagery, because I couldn't sum it up any other way. So I hope it works.
In 2013, an accelerator in Switzerland was able to measure the radius of the proton more precisely than ever before.
Imagine inside the Large Hadron Collider, you're riding a particle beam, a corpuscle inside a muscle that's pumping the whole universal bloodstream. And just when it seems you can shoot like the Kareem, you remember it's all just a dream. But the splendor that comes from the act of surrendering helps you remember that you are the dreamer and you are the dream. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Every remarkable particle is a particular entity. I am a perfectly pristine event imprinted with unique identity. I am imprisoned in protons that are just temporarily baptized electrically. I am each one promised the eventual prize of perpetual life in eternity. Can be dated, equated, measured with mastery, named and numbered and known. So at last you see that's how you solve the vacuum catastrophe. It has to be. It has to be. It has to be. It has to be. I am. Look, you're the original, invisible essence, eternal, unthinkable, ancient of days, the one, indivisible, love unconditional, force irresistible, infinite mystery, blessed and biblical, indispensable, incomprehensible, unpredictable, as the uncertainty principle, you're absolutely invincible! Wake up! Wake up. Wake up. Reboot your life, stop playing possum. You're running in place in a race to the bottom. Your power subsumed in Gomorrah and Sodom. You think there's no rules, but you just got them. You're gradually wasting away to graduate your way through school. Don't let your mind become ossified just like some dinosaur fossil. Fool, you're the 13th apostle, your power is colossal. Resurrect your corpus colossum. You are the gospel according to awesome. Anything's possible. Ask Nassim. I know it's Nassim, not Nassim, but hey, you try rhyming corpus colossum and awesome with the man I'm honored to introduce to you right now. Ladies and gentlemen, the man himself, my friend, Nassim Haramein.
That was awesome. I like the history of my 30 years of research. That was really well researched. I don't know where you got all that material.
Yeah.
I got from the archives.
Yeah, thank you.
The Akashic record or something.
Well, I got friends in high places, and we managed to get those photographs that normally I know you don't let them out, but...
Well, yeah, that's the thing, reputation. But you can see I started very indigenous.
Yeah, well, you need to be. I mean, it takes that kind of dedication.
If you're gonna study anthropology and archaeology, you gotta live it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the thing about you, man. There's no half measures. It's just I'm gonna do it. I got to get right to the heart of the matter.
Well, the van was accurate. I was in the van for 5 years. I was studying very, very hard. I was studying almost 20 hours a day, every day. And I was climbing as well. I was in the mountains.
I got that picture. I got that one of you up on the rocks there with a flask.
Yes. Well, those were amazing times. Those were amazing times because I was climbing hard. I was mostly soloing, and I was studying really hard. And the van was very indigenous. It had it had all kinds of interesting features, including a hidden safe in my oven, so that I could put valuables in a place that I knew information that I didn't want to get out at the time, and so on. So
wow,
it was interesting, but it was some of the most amazing discovery time of my life. It was very, very important time, and it was really important that I was isolated, and that I could really concentrate on the stuff I was doing,
I completely understand. I wouldn't compare my journey to yours, except in the understanding the isolation part. I've only been at Shakespeare 17 years, so I'm just a newbie. I'll if I manage the next 13 and can say yes, I did 30 years in isolation too. But that's what it takes, and you did it. And I don't think there are any archived photos of that, so I had to kind of be a little creative. I hope people understand, but I think it is fairly accurate. But what I wanted to get across there is nobody knows what it takes, right? I mean, nobody knows. You can just rattle that off and say 30 years in a van. If you have any stories...
No, 5 in the van.
Oh, 5 in the van, 30 years basically in isolation. But the point is, that's what it takes. And you were determined enough to do that. Do you have any recollections of that time where you were... there must be so many. I throw it open to you, but I mean, anything comes to mind that is significant in terms of, that moment, yes, that particular moment, that was a turning point in my research where I knew absolutely I was onto it. Mm-hmm. Are there a few of those that you can actually be able to convey to us in a way that
there's like you were saying, there's so many, there's thousands, and I mean, in some ways you could say that every minute of it was a turning point, because I was, it's the learning and it's the expansion of as well going down, dead ends, and then like finding the way around it, and all this stuff, but certainly starting very early when I was 10, for instance, and realizing that dimensions had to be scalar in nature, and that there was a geometry to space and all this. I mean, those were very early moments of inklings and looking for patterns in nature. I would sit on a bench. My father was a psychiatrist for children, and at the University of Montreal, he was the right hand of Piaget when he did his teeth, and we had discussed many concepts of psychology and consciousness and all this. And so I remember sitting in front of the theater that was beside my house, and there was a bench right at the exit, and analyzing the way people walk and analyzing the way people talk to each other and interacted, and see if I could see patterns of, behaviors and patterns of the way do people kind of like belong to certain groups that I could identify as different, kind of geometry of the relationship of things. And I was already looking for patterns in nature, and I made a few discoveries early on, like this is around 10, 11 years old, that were really significant. The concept were already there, the idea that there was an infinite amount of scales, that singularity had to be present everywhere. That was around the age of 11. And but I as well learned to meditate at the time, and I learned about the internal world as well. That was important for me, and during those moments I had the inkling that there was an exchange of information between what I was absorbing and what I was emitting, which eventually clearly I would apply to black holes and Hawking radiation and information transfer and information paradox issues and so on. But certainly, there was other moments, of course, many. One when I hurt my back significantly. I broke some vertebra and when I was a ski pro. I was a ski pro for almost 20 some years of my life in Canada, at a very high level, and I injured my back, and I was on my back for almost 6 months during a summer, recuperating at my father's house in Montreal. And I had moments of great illumination of the geometry of space, and starting to define what the patterns of space would be very early on, the geometry, and then trying to look at the time, the mathematics of it at a very simple level, just to get a clear understanding of the geometry, and then the relationship to physical laws. And then eventually, and so that became a hobby, although I was a ski pro at the time. I had much interest, and a few years later, eventually, I retired from my ski career and moved into the van and started the great adventure. This is early 90s, end of the 80s, early 90s. And
can I pause you there a moment? I want to ask very specifically, an injury to your spine.
Mm-hmm.
It tells me, knowing full well, that there are no accidents. Were you aware of at the time about spinal energies and how? I mean, is it possible, you think, that the injury triggered energies in the spine that would be giving you this enlightenment? Because as later on we learn, of course, how to move that energy up and down the spine in advanced meditations. Did that occur to you at the time?
Well, it more, if we want to talk more spiritually, or in terms of probability, it's more like it gave me the opportunity, to spend enough time studying and thinking about these things while I was laying back, and recuperating. And but as well, the spinal injury was compounded multiple times by other spinal injuries when I was a climber, where I had a fall that was pretty dramatic, and where I fractured another vertebra, and this time in the middle of my back. But all along this, since I was a kid, the same interests were building. And these was really it. So these were events that maybe slowed me down enough so I could do something more, or just I don't know. I think that in some way it was maybe planned by the great overall,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
structure of space.
Well, I don't mean to suggest it was a picnic or anything, but I do think it's rather curious that you had so many spinal injuries, and that I personally, I would reflect on that. Yes, certainly having more time, great, definitely.
Yeah, well,
Focus.
those things are important because as well, it's like life sends you curveballs,
Yeah,
and you gotta see what is the opportunity
yeah,
when it happens, and sometimes it's hard to see it because you're
yeah.
stuck in it and it doesn't feel so good, but there's always an opportunity, and you got to seize it when it comes.
There you go.
And for me it was really important, and so eventually it became something that, like, when I retired from skiing, um, it became a thing in which I was discovering a really deep level of nature, at the same time being from nature, discovering really deep level of myself.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the most powerful and meaningful thing that you can extract from physics, um, that you understand your relationship to the universe and how you came to be organized in this structure that's able to think and able to look back at the universe and wonder how it works, and which would tell you how you work. And as you learn how you work, then you can work better with what you've got. And so many of these injuries I had from the sport industry, I repaired quite well from, because I could talk to my body, and
How fascinating. Yeah. I
yes,
don't hear
and
many. I mean, maybe you know the world. Well, certainly you know that world a lot better than I do. But in general, I don't listen to physicists and mathematicians talking about how much it helps them understand themselves, and
yes,
that is a
I'm not
truth that
the
I.
usual one.
Well, that's the
Yes, I
point, and
know.
that's what I love so much about your talks and about what you're conveying to us now, because that is the point.
Mm,
I don't mean to direct it back to Shakespeare for very long, but just to say, everybody wonders, how did this man who wrote all the greatest works of literature, why is he incorporating mathematics and geometry and science into it? He's incorporating it because it's both. It's left and right brain. There is no balance without the two. And his
mhm.
purpose was alchemy, bringing them together. Why? Not to give you a great play, not to give you great mathematics, to get you to understand alchemy, to get you to understand it's all about. It's funny. It's all about you, which a lot of us kind of think automatically. Well, it's all about me, but you know what I mean. It's about the I am. So to hear you say that, wonderful. That's the truth of it.
It's very profound,
Yeah.
and it really is something you find across most of the greatest physicists
Yeah.
that have contributed the most to physics in history. That is a common theme.
Yeah.
They all talk about the you know the individual aspect of physics, meaning in terms of their relationship to physics and to consciousness in a very deep matter.
Yeah.
Schrodinger, or Einstein, like Heisenberg, all of them, they all talked very deeply about the relationship of their individuality with the physical world. And in some ways, you could look at physics as an exploration of that relationship, because you have a frame of reference and you have a system that you're observing, And the definition of these relationship is not a linear one. It's not very clear in the standard model how the observer and the observed interact, like, and I mean formally, meaning in terms like strictly, and so formally in physics, there's issues that arise specifically with the event horizons of black holes, in which the definition of the proper frame is unclear, meaning if you're on the outside of the black hole looking at a particle falling in, it appears as it's slowing down and eventually freezes on the surface of the event horizon. While if you take the frame of reference of the particle continues to accelerate towards singularity, not noticing any change at the horizon. So you have two realities, that are coinciding, if you'd like. Of course, the mechanics of what is actually happening is the proper frame, which is the frame of the particle. And when I mean proper frame, that's an expression in physics that is strict, meaning, I'm not saying it as a adjective to frame. It's actually a thing in physics, the proper frame, and that is the particle falling into the black hole. So the information of the particle is still on the horizon, but the particle is no longer there, if you'd like, from an external perspective.
From the point of view of you, observer, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So, there's many implication to this, and one of them is that space is entangled. That is, that there is a relationship between all points in space, and which leads to the holographic theory, or the holographic principle being a part of the theory.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Great Vedic philosophers would say it in sentences such as Yogananda says, "I am the bubble, I am the wave of the entire ocean, and they are the same thing." And how can that be? One tries to wrap one's head around it, but you won't. But the work that you're doing is in a way stunningly proving it. I'm proving it mathematically in a way that can be understood completely rationally on something that is really utterly irrational, utterly incomprehensible to most of our minds, until one becomes back home with the one, right? And then you're the whole thing, so you can understand it. But it is a maddening kind of concept, isn't it? How can that be? How can the one tiniest particle be the whole thing? And yet they all say it. All the great ones say it.
Well, not only in philosophy, but in physics. If you look at the Big Bang Theory, it starts in a singularity the size of a Planck oscillation, and that is billions of times smaller than an atom, trillions and trillions of times smaller than an atom, and that's the whole universe supposedly came out of it. So that even the standard theory of cosmology is stuck with singularity as they roll back time to the beginning. And so
what beginning? That's the maddening thing, isn't it? They will not address that. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. What happened before the
bang
beginning? But if you think of it, the mind cannot grasp it. I always find this interesting, and perhaps you can comment on it.
No. The mind can grasp it. There's
well, I was going to say what
beautiful formalism now for it. That's the thing, Alan. That's the crazy part, is that when you write the math for it, then all of a sudden it makes sense. You can actually grasp it.
So help me grasp it then, because the way I always frame it is, I say, I can remember as a little boy, 4 years old, thinking about my life rolling out on a spool of film above my bed, and I would see it going and going and going, and I'd imagine, when am I going to die? And then of course, what I was going to say is the mind cannot grasp it ending. I mean, the mind cannot grasp that. It automatically thinks, and what next?
Yes.
Right? You cannot conceive of, it's just over and now I never existed, because that's what that would mean. But then if you reverse that and go, okay, wait a minute, let me think, there never was a beginning. That, for a while, will drive you mad. There never was a beginning is...
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You have to think about it instead of thinking about it in terms of linear time, which is highly debatable in terms
Yes.
of the universe. You have to look at it in terms of scale relationships. So if you think of the amount of cells you're made of, about like 30 to 100 trillion cells, and
last time I checked.
And each cell is made of about 100 trillion atoms. So already you're 100 trillion by 100 trillion, right? Something like that. In the complexity, right? And you're going down. Now you're going down inside yourself, right? And you keep going, then you find protons, and then electrons and protons, then like you start finding smaller and smaller stuff, subatomic particles, and so on. Eventually you will get to a Planck. I mean, assuming that you had an accelerator big enough, which would have to be a black hole at that point. You find a Planck, and you could keep going, right? You could keep like imagining that there's sub-Planck and sub-Planck and so on. And if you go in that direction, right, you realize that you're inside like a solar system, and you're on a planet inside a solar system that's inside a galaxy, that's inside a cluster, that's inside a supercluster, that's inside a universe, which is most likely inside a multiverse. And so, but the thing is that if you want to be able to visualize the infinitely big, you have to be able to visualize the infinitely small. And it's much easier to visualize the infinitely small, but because it's internal to you. And this is what the realization that I had when I started meditating when I was 11 is that, I can have perception outside myself, but I can have perception inside myself as well. By using other techniques, and other glands even. So that was when actually I started thinking, as I was saying earlier, that there's an exchange of information between the infinitely small and the infinitely big across a boundary that was me, right? That's me in between the two. I don't know if it makes any sense to you, if it helps you visualize it. But
what does that mean then? I mean, in other words, you're saying, it's easier to go inside because that's still inside me, than go outside because that's outside me. But that's still limiting the me, isn't it? We're really thinking physical body, or at least physical plus astral body, or whatever we conceive to be ourselves. Isn't it really still an illusion?
We're just considering the physical body. I just give you a physical description of what you are. There's nothing in there that was esoteric. I just describe your atoms and describe where you are in the universe at the same time, like the planet and the solar system, the galaxy, and all this. So those are all physical things, right? And so that's the important part, is that, okay, well, if all these things are physical things and they're embedded in each other, and the space between them is not empty, it's full of electromagnetic fields, right? Then there is, every time something moves, Like imagine an oscillation on one of the surfaces, right? Then imagine it, like producing scale relationships so that it gets bigger, like the noise of everything together produce the dynamics that you see at every scale, the talking, right? So you have a boundary here and you have a boundary here, and it's not empty in between, okay, between the scales.
Right.
So when this oscillate, then this oscillate, then this oscillate, then this oscillate, right? And you can imagine the noise of everything from the infinitely small to the infinitely big, producing all the forces, all the mass, all the electromagnetic fields, all this oscillation of all these things, producing all the effects that we call physical, including all the constants of physics, all the forces, and that I was able to write that equation now, like this. I mean, it's not one equation, it's like a few thousand, but it's, it's analytical all the way through. There's no free parameters or hidden variables. It's all analytical through, and it relates all these things together. So, right from the start, the relationship of the frame of reference to the observer and observer, dynamic, the exchange of information across the boundary that makes it oscillate, how it's talking to each other, if you'd like. That whole thing you can describe in terms of exchanging information across scales. And when you do that, you get the right thermodynamics, and you write the right angular momentums, and you get all the right answers as the thing talks to itself. And eventually it leads to an object that's complex enough, 100 trillion cells, that can turn around and ask questions about itself.
Yes. Well, one of those questions that you turned around and answered, and I'd love you to describe it for our audience, because this is maybe to my audience, it's tangential to some of the things that I cover in what I'm normally talking about, but it really isn't. It's all the same thing. It's all one. One of my favorites, my favorite quote of Shakespeare's is that it's all one. But so I put a line in that song. That's how you solve the
Shakespeare was on it.
Oh, he was on it. He was absolutely it. I'm more than convinced that the beings that did that work are enlightened masters who came to Earth to deliver this. I just want to make a comment on what you said earlier about all these great, the greatest physicists all knew it. They all knew it came back to the personal, to the meaning of life, the meaning of who am I, and I found that in music, for instance. The best musicians I've ever met or known all know. They are not full of ego. They are not going, look at me, I'm a fleeting little blip of a pop star for a couple of years. They know where it comes from. Brahms knew where. I didn't know Brahms personally. Maybe I did. I'm not quite sure. But I'll have to check on that. But, but all the greats will talk of where it comes from. And that, of course, enables them to diminish and get to at least some value of humility that's useful. I don't mean that everyone has to be humble in doing anything, because, hey, you're the whole thing. Hey,
well,
you got it,
that's
flaunt
the
it.
thing.
You are the whole thing.
Yeah. When you're the whole thing and you know that everybody else is the whole thing too, then it's easy to have humility, right?
It is, because there's no, I'm the only person worth talking at this party. Jamie says it a wonderful way. He said it on one of the Bardcasts early on. He said, it's great when you know you're the whole thing. It's the problem is when you think you're the You're the only whole thing. So long as you recognize that everyone else is the whole thing, you're on good solid ground. But I've noticed that with all the best musicians and all the best writers, they're humble, and we're all just in school. We're all learning and learning and learning, and you come back and you come back and you come back. But as you know more, you can impart more. But the vacuum.
And you have more responsibility.
Absolutely, and that's the bitch of it, isn't it? It's I thought I could rest now. No, no. So, can you tell us? Can you explain to our audience in, I don't know, hopefully little teeny tiny words, what's the vacuum catastrophe? And how did you solve it?
The vacuum catastrophe is the result of this chasm in physics between quantum theory and relativity. So in quantum theory, when you look at the vacuum structure, so let me unpack that a little bit. In quantum theory, when you look at the space inside the atom, or the space that would be present, which is 99.99999% of an atom is mostly space, it's full of energy. It's not empty. It's not it's not passive. It's very dynamic, and it's fluctuating at a very, very high frequency, meaning it's fluctuating at the Planck scale. So there's a C that is typically thought of, particles that are very fleeting. So they've been called virtual, but it's not because they don't exist. It's just because they're very fleeting, that are fluctuating, like electromagnetic fields that are fluctuating, so that space cannot be said to be empty at all. In fact, it's full of energy. Just like the space around you right now is full of energy that you're not aware of, like, radio waves, all kinds of electromagnetic waves, like microwaves and so on, that you're not aware of. There's quantum fluctuations of electromagnetic fields, meaning space time itself at the quantum level is fluctuating with all this energy. And so when you calculate this, and it's fundamental calculations for quantum theory because it comes from the Planck's units or the Planck's constant, and so on, and it produced Planck's units. And this is when you calculate how much of these little particles there is in a centimeter cube of space in terms of energy or in terms of mass, it's huge. It's the mass of it's 39 orders of magnitude larger than the mass of the universe in a centimeter cube of space. It's insane. The amount of energy at the quantum scale that's available and that's fluctuating in the vacuum is really, really, really high. And when you look at the cosmological scale, so now we've gone outside of quantum theory, now we're in relativistic mode, we see that the universe is expanding and accelerating. So an energy had to be added. It's called dark energy. And it had to be added to make the universe expand and accelerate. And that energy was thought to be the result of these fluctuations at the quantum level in the space. Except that the density of these fluctuations at the cosmological scale is 10 to the minus 30 grams per centimeter cube, where at the quantum scale is 10 to the 94, 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cube. So you have a split of 120 orders of magnitude, which is huge. It's incomprehensible number, right? Like the radius of the universe in centimeters is 10 to the 28, right? So 120 orders of magnitude difference between the two density between quantum theory and the universe. was huge, and that was called a catastrophe in physics. It's the biggest error in physics that was, it's been called that way. It's been called the biggest problem in physics, and so on, because the two theories didn't agree at all. And so, I showed in my paper, Resolving the Vacuum Catastrophe, that it's clearly just a change of volume, between the quantum world and the universal size, that there's relationship between the two. And so when you take a proton, for instance, and you calculate the vacuum density inside there and you grow it so that it's the size of the universe, then the vacuum density drops as the volume increases clearly, and it drops exactly to what we measure when we measure the vacuum density at the universal size. So we know that the universe grew at least from a proton size, if not smaller, before, and it's consistent with the idea that the universe has grown from a point of very, very high level of density. So all this resolves it, because it gives a mechanism showing that it's not one or the other. It's just a progression in an evolution of a system.
Okay. Did you all get that? Everyone with us so far. I want to... Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
I know you said like a short bite about it. And,
no, I know it can't be a short bite.
I'm sorry.
We are... that's the whole point. It can be... It can go on endlessly in terms of trying to describe it, but didn't Einstein also say something like, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old child, then it's not really, you're not doing a very, very good job. And I think you just did a very good job there. I can imagine what you're saying. Yes, intense density, and it has diminished by the amount we would expect if like blowing up a balloon, right? I'm just going to go
right,
bump, 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 bump. But then the question is, who's blowing up the balloon? Of course. So,
exactly. Exactly.
That's a big question.
Yeah, that's resolved. Like I finished that part.
Yes, actually. I know. I've seen your talks on it, and I'm sure many of us have. Many of the audience have, and if you haven't, just look it up. Nassim is all over the internet. You can find these talks easily. Though we want to, I want to take this on a trajectory now that kind of leads us to something that was an experience for me that was very, very, very beautiful, and it was you, Nassim, who literally prodded it. And so let me just set it up this way. But 3 months ago, there was this annular solar eclipse, which is a particular kind of solar eclipse, which I'll show in a bit of a presentation that I will show to illustrate it. But you posted and said, "Hey, look at this. This is interesting." Now, most crop circles, not most, but a very, very high percentage, are now getting enormously complex. Right? It's inconceivable that you can brush it off with, "Oh, that's drunken farmers on a Saturday night with planks." I mean, it's it's just not the way it works, and they are so beautiful geometrically. But this turned out this was a very simple one, and I love analyzing things geometrically, and so because of you prompting me on this, I went into it, as you know, and it revealed something rather interesting, which is to do with something you talk about, the proton puzzle, proton problem, and a number that you got. I mean, after all those pictures that I showed you with your various adventures in the forest and on the mountains, you come out, and in 2013 you write this magnificent paper that turns out to have solved a ton of stuff that no one thought was possible to solve, and it was proven in this collider. And so, but of course, was it accepted? Were you welcomed with open arms?
There was an attempt. I was scheduled to give a talk at CERN, but that got canceled by the director at the time.
Yeah.
Which disliked me. But I think now it might be different. I think.
The point is this number, this 84013.
Well, you see, this was not until 2018 that was confirmed. You see that at the time, the pulsar did an accelerator did a scattering using a muon, which is an heavy electron, to find the radius of the proton. I had made a prediction of the radius of the proton that was 4% smaller than the standard model, and that's like a whole other universe in quantum theory.
Right. And that's the one where you're getting about 200 or 207 times closer to the actual proton, right? So that you can measure far more accurately. I mean, I'm only quoting you. I don't understand it, but I'm trying to appear intelligent here.
You're trying to scatter off the proton with an electron or a muon.
Yeah.
And get a sense of exactly where the boundary is, where the radius is. The problem with muons is that they were heavier than normal electrons. So they were saying, since it gave a value that was 4% smaller, I was within 1 sigma of the measurement, which means I was inside the margin of error of their experiment.
Yeah.
They were saying maybe it's flexing the surface of the proton. That's why it's getting the wrong value, because the standard model was in big trouble if the radius of the proton was 4% smaller. Like, that would change a lot of things. And so it would have an impact on the Rydberg constant, for instance, and so on. And so there was a lot of pushback at the time. And then it was repeated, and then eventually it was repeated with an electron, beam that was more precise than ever before, and without using the standard model corrections to the equations for the data, they got the right value all of a sudden. Look at that. And so that was confirmed with an electron, and I was inside still 1 sigma. I'm still inside 1 sigma. That means I'm still inside their margin of error, almost, although it's much more precise now. And so then CODATA, which is the standard for all physics that gives all the units in physics, in 2018 was updated with the new radius of the proton, which was my prediction. And so that was really, really powerful, because at the same time as they did that, they made h bar a exact constant, meaning they used it as the standard for mass. For the units, right? With one of them being mass, where mass before was a spherical crystal ball in a vault in Paris. 1 kilogram.
Couple of hundred years old, yes. 120 years old.
The standard was changed to the Planck's units, which is very, very critical to my theory.
Yeah. So h bar, for those who don't know, that's the reduced Planck constant, and it's significant that it's now been accepted. I don't know if the word is accepted correctly. It's now been determined.
Yes.
To be an absolute constant,
fundamental constant,
first principles constant. So what I want to just explore with you, because we've gone over this before. We had a chat about it in terms of, I had never ever analyzed a crop circle. I do a lot of geometrical analyzation with the Shakespeare work, which seems a tangent too, until you realize, no, he left all kinds of geometry in plain sight, but hidden in the punctuation on Sonnet's cover and various plays. And you think, well, okay, why is he doing that? A, how does he know it? And B, why is he doing that? It must be very, very, very important. Of course, if he'd have come out and said it 400 years ago, you'd be burned at the stake. So, that's why it had to be hidden, yes. But then all of a sudden, this sort of, if you
I
believe
have
it,
felt little flames throughout my career as well.
you have getting
Yes,
closer,
yeah,
little like,
little
ooh,
flames here and there.
better not say that. How can
You
I put
must
it?
have too.
Can I put it a different way? So the interesting thing to me is all right, a crop circle comes. It looks very, very simple. It's not at all a complex one. In fact, it's been written off by a lot of people saying, "Oh, that's got to be one of the hoaxes." You know, well, there are no doubt some hoaxes. Obviously, that's what makes the whole thing interesting. You know, it's fake news, folks, and yet there's real news buried, and which is which. But the ones that are obviously massively complex geometrically, there's no doubt. Where do these come from? All right, we're stuck with that for the time being. I'd like to get into it with you if you have time, because I know that you are fascinated with it, as am I, as to the extraterrestrial origin, possibly, of this. But leaving it just as a pattern, I see this pattern, I looked at it, and I started examining the geometry of it. But the fascinating thing is, it is telling us, seems to be, it is telling us a number. And when I showed you that number and you realize, my God, it's within 99.99996% accurate to what the number that you came up with, that's a bit of a mind blower. Was whoever did this crop circle giving us a little nudge, a little wink, a little, check this out, you know? I mean, it seems incomprehensible on the surface of it, but on the other hand, who's to say? What am I, you know?
A wink from the galactic community, that would be nice.
Well, don't you think so? Haven't you had some winks from them?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there you
Well,
go.
you know.
I mean, I think you talk about this far more than I do. I have been very, very loath to talk about it, as I have expressed to you in the past, only because I got my hands full. I'm trying to say this and that and about Shakespeare, and he wasn't Shakespeare, and the Virgin Queen was no virgin, and all the things that you think, oh, well, it wasn't that at all. You know, you pick your battles, right? I don't need to be labeled, oh, now he's saying Shakespeare was an alien. No, I'm not saying that, you know. So you pick your battles. But on the other hand, this thing just fell into...
That's not as bad as me. I said all humans are aliens.
And that's where we have to end it, folks. And so we hope you've enjoyed our show today.
Well, I'm in good company. I've got Creek with me, you know. And
hey, you've got me with you.
Other...
What is this word alien anyway? Come on.
Well,
come on.
You know, that's the thing.
What is it?
I mean,
extraterrestrial, you could say there's some basis because it's a scientific term.
Directed Prince Permia, 1979. Creek, you know, Nobel Prize winner for the discovery of the double-strand DNA. He concluded that genetics on this planet had to be imported by advanced civilization, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. So
you may have heard it here first, folks, but it has been said many, many times in the past, and Nassim is right. I mean, that's it. So why do we get our knickers in a twist over, oh, you know, the Arcturians and Syrians and what? If we are all one, can't we all just agree that, yeah, we're all one? We're all one. There is no such thing as alien. Extraterrestrial simply meaning off of this terrestrial ball, yes. But Nassim is saying also, but we weren't from here in the first place anyway. So get used to it.
I mean, what do you mean from here? Here is
exactly.
It's a hard thing to define in an infinite fractal, right?
There you go. So can I just show our audience this design? Sure. And I want you to comment on it then and say whether you think, all right, does it even make sense that number which you arrived at with mathematics that would curl the hair of most of our audience and most people on the planet? There's probably only a half a dozen people who really truly understand it. But the point is, we accept that, oh yes, you know what you're talking about, it's there, you can write it down, and then given enough time you can probably explain it to us, that there's mathematics at the root of it, and working from the proton level to the universe level, you can prove that the entire universe, as you said to His Holiness when we were privileged to be with him, Robert, Grant, myself, and yourself, a couple of years ago, when maybe we'll get into that a little, to be with the Dalai Lama, and you said to him, "Yes, but I've got the equation for it now," and he turns to his compadres, some other lamas, and says something in Tibetan which none of us understood.
Right.
And he goes, and they all run like cockroaches. It's like,
yes.
Oh, you turn the light on, and they all went.
I wasn't sure if I had offended him, or if he was excited. I'm like, oh my God, are they all come back with guns and put us in jail? Or
we all held our collective breath. It was a marvelous moment, people. Honestly, I've got a photograph that almost is that moment. And but he says to the Dalai Lama, yes, because the Dalai Lama had written a book called "The Universe in a Single Atom." I mean, that's Buddhist philosophy. Yeah, the whole universe is in a single atom. Along comes Nassim and says, "Well, I've actually proven it. It's in one proton, And so he goes, and we carry on talking. And we're thinking, when are we going to get thrown out? About 45 minutes later, he says, "Oh, now we
were supposed to be there 20 minutes.
We were supposed to be there, yeah, something fairly short. And after we all gave a little bit of presentations of this and that and the other, what we'd come to say, but essentially it was to be in his presence, obviously, and feel that genius of holiness, if you want to call it that. And so, which we all have, by the way. I'm not saying anything about geniuses and holy people. We're all it. Get used to it. But but he comes. Then he says, "Oh, lunch is ready," and now we're in his private quarters, and we had lunch with him for 4 hours, which I know is the worst form of name dropping, but hey, it happened, right? And we're sitting, and we later found out from Lama Tenzin the next day. We said, "What did he say when Nassim gave him the equation?" And Lama Tenzin said, "Oh, this conversation is going to take more time. Prepare lunch." That's what he said, and that's why they all went running. And so, you have to at some point accept, all right, hey, I am on the right track here. I know it. I know that you feel the same about this. You feel it in intuition. Oh, for sure. Sometimes the intuition is off. I'm pretty good at intuition with Shakespeare. I can't find a parking space to save my life. But you know when you know, and you go, I know this. I feel this. I have got to go down this route. I know where it is leading, and no one could dissuade me, right? And so that's why you have been your whole life in this 30 years of preparation, because you wouldn't give that much time to it if you thought you were nuts, right?
I had moments of wondering.
Don't we all?
But that in general, you have to keep your convictions in those moments, and then you get through them. But sometimes you wonder, is it me or is it them? And it's sometimes
them.
it.
Ooh. Well, let me just show you this thing. Let me show our audience this part of what happened with this. And again, remember, this is Nassim turns me onto this. He says, check this out. I check it out. I've never done an analysis of a crop circle in my life, but I can see the geometry, and I kind of know where it's going. So I wanted to see how accurate it was. So here we go. If you remember,
you did such a good job on this. By the way,
this was a drone movie of it, and like you say, it's a very, very simple one on the surface. On the surface, it's nothing like the massive ones that are hundreds and hundreds of circles. But I had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I look at this one, I say, oh, wait a minute. I kind of know there's a pattern here. Now, I'm going to show you just one little thing that's...
That was the eclipse day, I believe, or close to it.
That was the what?
It was the day of the eclipse. or was it
Well,
close?
I'm going to tell you. Here's the interesting thing. It was actually 48 hours in advance
Oh, right.
of the solar annular eclipse. Now, I like to put things always into the spiritual context, as you know, and I always try to think of what does the divine think of this. This is the divine, the circle. Circle always represents, right, ultimate infinity, eternity, the one. And if the one decides to have a creation at this so-called Big Bang, which was preceded by other Big Bangs and other Big Bangs, because as we've already just discussed, it went on forever. It will go on forever, but it never started in the first place. So the one says, all right, I want to make a man in my image and create another circle, and that's another one. But as soon as you're in duality, of course, there's the realization that it all works on duality. It's got to have electrons and protons. It's got to have light and dark. It has division. And so there really is this two, which is the first image in Euclid's Elements, isn't it? The very first thing. There's a point, there's a line, there's a circle. You put two together and you've got the vesica piscis, which everybody pretty much knows about. And the interesting thing is one can divide the vesica like there's the two circles this way. And I was thinking, to the one circle, it thinks it's just duality. I mean, that's the way we start off life. You got one cell, two cells, 4, 8. We all know that's the most elementary progression. So whichever side of this you're on, male, female, or whatever, you could say that to the circle, there's the divine, there's the one that created the other one that created the two, and then it goes on. And it's forming a very elementary progression. But to the overall picture, to the circles that are a vesica, there's a different progression going on. There's the one that created the two, that created then the three, and that results in this. So it depends again on your perspective. Are you looking from the point of view of the observer as a circle, or from the overall point of view of the vesica? Two circles. So I just continued this out thinking, well, this is very interesting. But I didn't just decide to do this. I literally did it because I saw the pattern in the mud lane crop circle, and I thought, oh, that's what's going on. But literally just taking you through this, it's just simple duplication. But you see that instead of going 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, on the other side of things, from this other perspective, you have a completely different arithmetic progression going on, where to the overall picture, the vesica is seeing that. And I thought, is that a progression that is significant? Because if so, I think this is what this crop circle is showing us, that it's all there in the one, and there turns out to be, there is a particular value of splitting that circle up into 48ths like that, and it's 7.5 degrees if you split it up in that way. So now to go to the crop circle, and very, very quickly, this is what it looked like. And from various positions, I noticed there's this little track that is moving towards one of the tractor tracks. It's just in the middle there. Hoaxers would say, oh yeah, that's where I walked out with me planks. But no, I mean, it's just, it ends. it goes to the middle and it ends there. And it's a very definite part of it. I didn't even know what these were called. I think they're called tram lines now, having spoken to a couple of aficionados of this. But the tractors, the tractors have already made these lines there. Whatever or whoever did this decided to put these circles on the ground and made them interact with those with at least that one tractor track. If you turn the picture around so that you get it level, because you've got to do that in the first place, you've got to have a perspective on it and see there are two circles here. Oh, and you notice that they are actually a perfect vesica, the black circles. That's a vesica piscis. It's two circles, circle A and circle B. Of course, there are others, and that's what makes it a little confusing at first. There's this other circle in the middle that doesn't seem to be what you'd expect of the splitting of that first circle. In fact, it isn't. And yet this outer circle that's sort of hanging out there on the left is exactly that circle. And yet there's also another circle inside there that you can see that is, again, cut off. Now, if you just see it that way, you say, oh, that looks like, that's giving us a picture of an eclipse. And that is the right circle. That is the half circle of the bigger circle. It's perfectly how it would divide that way. So what are they telling us? And what is this outer circle here? Because that, again, kind of spoils the pattern. But they are a visual representation, clearly, once you see it that way, of an annular eclipse. And what happens during an annular is, and here's the interesting part, this cropped up, no pun intended, 48 hours before the event happened. It showed up. This is what annular eclipses look like. It's when the moon is farthest away from the Earth, and so its shadow is not going to be a perfect eclipse of the sun. And of course, that's an interesting phenomenon in itself, isn't it? The moon is exactly the right size to be the size of the sun in the Earth, though it's 400 times less size, but yet the sun is 400 times further away. I mean, it's a bit suspicious in the first place. But this, when the moon gets further and further away, does not cast this perfect shadow. It casts this kind of shadow, and you've got this ring of fire, it's called, around the sun, around the shadow of the moon, rather. So I think they're saying, greetings, fellow travelers. Hi, I want you to look at this. It's very, very beautiful, but what then are these two? I mean, you got to measure them. You got to look at them. If they're intentional, what do they mean? First off, that one at the bottom, circle F, looks very much like a solar cross or an earth symbol. It's also very similar to the Native American sun cross. And that makes sense. You'd say, okay, it's the solar. They're telling us something about the solar eclipse, therefore solar cross and the Earth. It's all part of the mathematics of it. But it turns out to be precisely that. It's the two of them would form a vesica within. So this is the circumscribed circle of the yellow circle F, which in itself is very interesting. And it's got this other division within it that looks like that, and the size of those would be precisely this. So that's where I got the idea that it's doing this duplication and trying to teach us something from that. But the giveaway is that this track to track is a perfect tangent to this other circle over on the left. I mean, it's perfect there. And you think, okay, so how beautiful. I'm calling this a human collaborative masterpiece, ET human, because it is. It's a collaboration. It would remind me of when I would teach piano and say to a little kid, let's write a song today. And the kid would say, I can't write a song. And you'd say, sure you can. Sure you can. Just hit some notes. Boom, 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 boom. Right. And they do that, and as a little melody comes out. And so here's this farmer unaware of the fact that he's part of a collaboration here, but he is. Or she is. I don't mean to be misogynist about it. Whoever made that track to track had some help from somebody else saying, hey, nice job, I'm going to embellish it a bit. Because they made a perfect tangent there. And then you see, but if this is 90 degrees to that track, there's a perfect tangent there. How interesting. And then if I go to the center of that green circle, there's a perfect tangent there that happens to cross precisely at the vesica point of the two black circles. And then this crosses precisely at the zenith of the original circle on the green circle. So it's obviously intentional. It's not drunks on a Saturday night, right? It's clearly there. All tangents. This is 90 degrees. This is perfectly flat now to the original circles, and it's tangent to that inner circle that is the wrong size for being the middle circle, right? But it's perfectly tangent to the green, and it's perfectly tangent to the yellow. How interesting. So you got to measure the slope of this track to track, and it turns out it's 7.5 degrees away from horizontal. And then these that are 90, they're all 7.5. So that's what leads you to, okay, wait a minute, if they're all, everything here is 7, what about that track I noticed? It's tilted, it's at right angles, and it's 7.5 degrees there. It's leading nowhere. It's 1/48th of 360 degrees, which then you realize, that is, look at that. that's been made the right size to be 1/8 of the double circles. The yellow has been made the right size to be 1/12 of the circles, and the blue in it is going to be 24. And you end up with this progression of numbers that is what I showed you at the beginning, because the proportions of the circle A is 1/16. The yellow is 2/16 of the circle A, the green is. So all these proportions are very, very exact. If that's so, they must be telling us something. This is not a lark. This is very simple geometry, but very precise. And this width of this outer circle is very, very close. I won't say it's exact because it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but it looks like it's dividing that up. The green and the yellow and the blue I'm absolutely certain of. The rest you have to kind of say, I wonder if that's what they're showing us. But it gives you this entire projection of numbers that I'm rushing through a bit now because I don't want this to take too long. But the point is that progression that I showed you from circle and vesica's perspective turned out to be exactly what they're showing here. It's the fact that that progression, all of those divisions are multiples of 7.5 of the circle. The 7.5 degrees that they chose to make to collaborate with the farmer on are the various icosatetragon, hexadecagon. They're all multiples of 7.5. All these numbers are, and they all of their particular polygons, regular polygons, fit within the circle into divisions of that. So that seemed to me, I felt as though I was being handheld through this, like, come on, little boy, you're getting it. It's just that. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. Now, what are we telling you with that? And if we are telling you something, it must be to do with this hidden square, because when you join all those tangents and that vesica, you have a perfect square here. You know, up at the top there, where you've got that's the vesica point, that's the tangent to the green, this is tangent to the yellow, this is perfectly straight line to this. It's giving you literally a square. So I had to measure that square and say, well, what is its relationship to the overall circle? And you don't have to worry about the mathematics here, everyone. I'm just going to show how you get it, but for those who do care, you could check it out if you want to pause the video and say, well, is he right or is he just BSing us? No, the ratio of the square to the circle is 2 to 3. It's exactly 2/3 of the circle. Why would you put a square there that's exactly 2/3 the area of the circle if there was not something significant about it? Well, then you have to follow that along, don't you? This we know is 1/6 and 1/6, these segments of a circle. That would be a 60-degree angle here. It's something to do with measuring by radians. But that area that I've colored orange there, that would be the exact same as or rather, what's left, the 2/3 would be the exact same as that square. So you got 2/3, 1/3. The ratio of that to the hidden square is 3 to 2. That's a perfect fifth in music. The ratio of 2 squares to the circle would be 4 to 3. That's a perfect fourth in music. The ratio of the circle and that part of the circle, 2/3 to 2 of those squares, would be a major third. They're all musical relationships. I'll just breeze through them quickly. I won't describe them all. You've got the octave there, and you've got the unison there. Now, as Nassim knows very, very well, I'll bypass this. This is all the math of how we got there to show you that there's certain things that are... I wanted to know what is the exact area of the vesica. I didn't know that. I knew how to calculate it, but I had to go through some numbers to figure it out. I know the exact area of the equilateral triangles, of course, but it turns out that you can calculate the area of that vesica, and it's this. It's 1/6 4 pi minus 3 root 3 times r squared. Here it's calculated. I'm just showing you the numbers so you could check it. It turns out to be a certain number that is that. Okay, put that number aside. We know that that's that number is the area of the orange part. Well, it turns out that if they're showing us all these relationships musically, you've got this line which looks very much like your scalar lines of everything going through from the tiniest to the biggest in the universe. It's got to be scalar. But as we well know, in music, you've only got the octave and the unison, and the fifth and the fourth in the middle are pretty spot on. But in order to get music to sound beautiful and harmonious polyphonically, you've got to do this thing called equal temperament tuning, which means you've got to just fudge it a tiny bit. But it's not fudged in a way that's non-mathematical. It's called the Pythagorean comma, and everybody knows what it is, and it's this particular number, 1.0136. It's a universal constant. It's not guesswork. It's how you reconcile music being out of harmony when it's done with pure Pythagorean tuning to how it becomes harmonious so it can be played by a polyphonic orchestra and sound beautiful. You have to make these little gray area smudges. But I just thought, I wonder what happens if that's what they're telling us, that these shapes are important. That divided by that, divided by that, divided by the Pythagorean comma, is that number. And I went, whoa, wait a minute, and recognized it as the number that Nassim came up with very, 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 very nearly when he presented his findings in 2013, and which now, by the way, has been accepted. So I then went back to something that you had asked me about 2 years ago. You'd asked me to investigate. You knew I'd done a lot of work on the Great Pyramid. Based on what? Based on Shakespeare. What does he know
Always
about the Great
amazes me how you come up with this stuff.
Well, this stuff that I'm showing you here is this is Shakespeare. This is pure Shakespeare. This is on the cover of the sonnets. He draws the geographic coordinates of the Great Pyramid, but he also draws us this connection. This just happens to be your number, and it's the most simple. I'm not cherry picking here. I'm just taking the height of the pyramid.
Just to be clear, it's the number of the radius of the proton. It was my prediction.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
What I'm showing you here is to say, what the? All right. I mean, what the?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, but there's a big question.
Can I comment on just?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, on the crop circle, just the work from the Vesica Pisces.
Yeah.
Whether someone believed that crop circle is man-made or not. The work you did on the geometry that ends up giving a value similar to the radius, the proton, comes from pure geometry. So even if you remove the crop circle thing and you're just doing geometry,
exactly,
you can arrive to those conclusions, right?
Right.
And so that's where I came from. Purely from geometry, but I was inspired by crop circles early on. I definitely, but I wanted to make that clear for people, and that is because that specific geometry of sphere packing is what the structure of space-time looks like.
Yeah.
At the atomic level and at the subatomic level and so on, and so. That's why these values emerge from that geometry, right?
Exactly.
And that's I just wanted to mention that as well.
Well, I'm glad you did, and I'm only showing this for 1 second just to then take us into that conversation. But to say,
okay.
At the same time, I went back to the work that I'd done on the Great Pyramid. That again, out of nowhere, it's Shakespeare telling you to have a look at it, and I. Not cherry picking any numbers. I'll go back to the keynote just for only 30 seconds. You take the height and the base, which is of course all you need. I mean, that's the definition of the pyramid in itself. The height and the base gives you the angle, the 51.843 degree angle. The everything else follows from it. That's the apothem, but the apothem cannot be anything but that because that's the geometry of it, right? And the half of the base is going to be half of the base, 220. But you look at that absolute most simple connection between those in the Great Pyramid, not in any other pyramid, not in the one that you asked me to investigate in relation to this, by the way. When you remember when you asked me to say, well, you found a lot of constants in the pyramid, what about the half octahedral? Because the half of an octahedron would be, in a way, the perfect pyramid. Why is there no perfect pyramid, right? The Great Pyramid is only isosceles triangle faces. An octahedron would be perfect equilateral. So you'd think, so you'd ask me to look into that, and that's another story.
I did.
But look at that. I mean, that's there as well in the Great Pyramid. And if you were to say, well, okay, let's put those two together, there you are. I've called it the Vesica comma calculation. The Vesica Pythagorean comma calculation gives us 0.841036. The Great Pyramid gives us 0.841033. Your calculation, which has now been accepted, right, in 2018 by CodeData, is 0.840874. No, I'm sorry, that would be the CERN calculation. I call that CERN, it's not CERN, sorry. The one up there was yours, 841236. So we've got 841236, 841033, 841036. Now, I'm not saying, that's all I've got there. I want to turn it back to you. I want to throw it open to you. Does it make any sense to you to say, I mean, why would you even say it? Well, you've almost answered that because you said, well, you got your data from first principles. You didn't just wake up one day and say, I wonder if the whole freaking universe will fit in a proton. No, you, right? Like you do.
Right. Well, I mean, it was an instinct pretty early on, as I was telling you. But the proof, the mathematical proof, was much, much, much later. Right. And I published it really in 2012, around December 21st.
I got a story about that too.
And it was, early on, like I said, I mean, it gave the right, the right mass, the right energy, the right forces, and all this for the proton, but the radius was 4% smaller, and so, but the thing is that when you look at that and you think about, so this, you think about this extrapolation, like how I came up with it, right? Like, you got it from the Great Pyramid. That's great. And maybe I should have looked there first, right? Especially, but from an octahedron relationship,
yes,
right?
Of course.
And so here you have the geometry of space, like emerging, that is exactly the geometric solution I give to mass. Meaning that in the geometric solution, in the holographic mass solution, we have Planck fluctuation that appears as little balls, right? That's the first approximation. It's most likely a torus. And well, actually, I've proven it's a torus. It's in that next paper, but it's very spherical. And it packs, and as it packs, it's going to produce this type of geometry where you have tetrahedral packing and octahedral packing, and you have interaction with the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, and all this. And when you look at these relationships and you write physics on it, which is what I did to extrapolate the mass, so the packing of these Planck fluctuations. So the proton being built out of these little Planck fluctuations. Now remember, they're billions and trillions of times smaller than a proton, right? So there's a lot of them. Well, so it just happens that each one of these fluctuations has a mass associated with it, because E equals mc squared. These little energies represent mass. And when you calculate the mass of all these little balls oscillating together to make a proton, you get the mass of the universe. So the mass of all the other protons in the universe, And then when you relate that mass of all these little plunks inside the proton to its surface, right? So that the surface is like containing all the little oscillations inside. This relationship gives you the correct mass and the correct radius for the proton. So it's emerging from geometry. So it's not, in some sense, it's not surprising that you find it again in geometry, right? The way you've been finding it.
Yeah.
It's just that in my case, I've associated it with physical values, right? Like the radius, the mass, the forces, the energy of the system, and now the scales, right? Like I've repeated the exercise for the electron, repeated the exercise for stars, for galaxies, for universe, and and for subatomic particles. So now I have the whole picture on how these little Planck oscillators organize themselves in different scales to produce the different masses, the different energies, the different forces, and what we call, reality as a whole. So geometry is really at the base, and I mean that's what Einstein did. He geometrized space-time, and he vouched that he was going to geometrize quantum theory before he died, and he didn't quite do it. He was close, but he was missing some of the tools we have in modern time, and some of the results we got from observation in modern time. He would have solved it if he would have had those tools, but now we have them, and so I was able to solve this. And what it says about the atomic world and the structure of space and the structure of our existence, and what it implies is very, very profound. It's very profound. It tells us we have an infinite nature, even in our physicality.
Yes.
And that is not, always realized by people. No atoms ever, like no protons ever just disappear, meaning like they're continuous. They don't decay, they keep doing their thing. And so there's an eternal nature to even the physical world that we observe.
Yes. Which is comforting.
Space transition. Yeah.
Isn't it? Which is comforting, I think. I mean, it's like, if there's some truth to be taken from this that I can use in my life, right? Because that's the question people always ask me at my presentations. It's great that he did that, and blah, blah, blah. What does it mean to me? Right? What does it mean to me?
Right.
In your work, it's that. It's I can prove to you that this universe is no accident, and it has been built with care and attention.
And that you have an active part in it. That that you're related to it at a very profound level.
So don't despair that you think it's all going to hell in a handbasket. It might look like it, but if there's
there's a purpose, but there's certainly, there might be moments of things going to hell in the handbasket. But
it all works out in the end, just like a play.
Exactly.
And we take a bow and go, ta-da! Thank you.
Well, it's like hopefully it eventually evolves into a more complex and advanced system, but it might go through phases of chaos, and that's always more difficult to deal with. But you can think of it as an oscillator in a laboratory, like a surface of a balloon that you're oscillating with sound waves, for instance, and then more energy you put into it, more you increase the amplitude of the oscillation, more the surface becomes chaotic, and then eventually, if you go up in frequency high enough, you see islands of coherency, emerging out of the chaotic behavior of the surface. And if the surface is strong enough and it doesn't rip apart and explode, if it has enough tensile strength, it will eventually pop into that next octave,
Mm-hmm.
which you understand well being a musician, which you're excellent at. And I just I like that visual as like, being like maybe humanity going through phases of chaos, and then eventually popping into when there's enough energy, popping into the next level of coherency.
And of course, all the great ones say that. I mean, the great Vedic scriptures say that the yuga cycles. That you've got the cycle of a day, the 24 hours, but you've got the cycle of the Earth going all the way around the sun. And you got the cycle. You got solar cycles. Then you got yuga cycles that are 24,000 years in length of the precession of the equinox, and on and on and on. And that it makes sense, perfect sense, that it's all scalar. It's all just, oh, there's this. Let's repeat it there. Let's repeat it there. Let's repeat it there. Until it's you can't even distinguish. Well, am I at the atomic level or the universe level, or are they the same thing?
What's remarkable is that we find the precession of the equators cycle on many different ancient sites, and in different cultures, and it's a very long cycle, very difficult to measure.
Exactly. You think, well, how do are they passing it down father to son, to daughter to mother, to make sure you remember this, because I won't be here, but I measured it last week. I have a hunch in 24,000 years it's going to look exactly the same. So could you keep notes? I mean, that in itself is nuts, right?
Yes, it's very just interesting.
Come on. No. This has been given to us. It has been understood from a far greater perspective, and
correct.
And then we've been taught it. Do you believe there is a theory of everything? Do you think we'll find it? Will we get there? We just write it down. It's that one equation solves it all.
I can't answer that without sounding arrogant.
Oh, please don't start now. I mean, no, I meant that in the nicest way. No, we've already said I am the whole thing, right? I am that I am.
Yes.
And so there's nothing arrogant about it. If it's
just that it's in the paper I'm writing right now. It. So since it's not peer reviewed yet, but I'm just gonna have to have people trust that what I'm saying I wouldn't be saying if it really wasn't that. And I will be able to support it in the next few months when the paper comes out. But yes, I believe it's been found.
Well, that's why I asked.
Well, because it's got all the constants in physics unified, all the forces and all the scales. So that's pretty well everything. But and that's just as a start. It's 200 pages, but it's just a start, because the rest follows very easily. You can see how biology eventually the physics for biology can be written, and the evolution, and then eventually consciousness, for sure, from information transfer and everything. So I think it's totally possible, and because it's done, but
That's all I want. That's it. I mean, and
it's terrible to say this because it sounds so arrogant, but it really just is math and physics, and actually, it's found in a very simple way by fluid dynamics. Actually, from the equations, like the Navier-Stokes equations emerge, Einstein field equations emerge. Special relativity emerged, quantum theory, all this under one central, formalism, and it's really beautiful and simple, and it has to do with flow. It has to do with fluid dynamics and different phases of fluid dynamics. So it goes from a Bose to a Bose-Fermi mix, and so it changes, right? It has phase transition. And these phase transition produce horizons, they produce boundary conditions, and it really does the job. And so then you realize it's all about flow. It's all about fluid dynamics and flow and movement and angular momentum and fluid dynamics, and you get all the forces. So gravity, electrogravitic effects, all these things become possible. So like there's all kinds of really incredible deep implications to it, and I'm sure will be topped off. I mean, I actually, the reason why I've been saying it's coming out for the last 2 years is because I can't find the end of it. So we're just gonna publish the core, and then it's just gonna explode.
Believe me, I understand. I completely
But
understand
I'm not
that.
taking the credit, meaning like it's gonna go way farther than I've taken it.
Yes, and isn't that ultimately that is another kind of answer to the question? Because yes, you can say, I got it. Oh, but there are other ramifications which I want to explain to you. It doesn't mean that the principal thing that you have stated and proven is incomplete. It's just that in order to be able to convey its ramifications, you want everybody to understand it. You want to say, look, here it is in music, here it is in biology, here it is in chemistry,
Right.
Here it is, because it has to be, otherwise you've got an imperfect universe. Do you believe God didn't know what he, she, it is doing?
Yeah, and
No.
yes,
Right.
and of course, if you figure out the fundamental mechanism, then you should be able to apply it to everything, and you should be able to find
Yes.
pretty well everything that occurs in the natural world.
And where are
Okay.
we in the state of that with the standard model?
Yeah.
I don't mean to
Right.
put you on the spot, but I mean, I have a little. I heard a little story the other day that I think is a perfect metaphor for it. I run it by you. It's about a group of American car executives who went to Japan to see their assembly line, and at the end of the line, the doors were put on their hinges, the same as in the USA, but something seemed to be missing. In the US, a line worker would take a rubber mallet and tap the edges of the door to ensure that it fit perfectly before they rolled it off the assembly line. In Japan, they didn't do that. So the American guy is confused. He says that the US auto exec said, at what point do you make sure the doors fit perfectly? And the Japanese executive didn't seem to understand the question. He replied simply, well, we make sure it fits when we design it. They didn't have the problem of they didn't need rubber mallets.
Yeah, because
it was designed
inside
perfectly.
spec
It was.
Yeah.
Well, why would you need that? We don't need the mallets. We don't need the guys to tap the doors, because the analogy is obviously what we're talking about here. It's, well, if you know the design of it and the math is right, what are you talking about, rubber mallets?
Right.
Academia has been hitting quantum mechanics with rubber mallets for how long? Right?
Well, you see,
right? Oh, let's invent this. Let's invent that to make it work. Let's invent this to make it work.
Right. It's been a lot of patchwork, both at the quantum level and at the cosmological level. At the cosmological level, one of the biggest patchwork is dark energy and dark matter, which I get rid of, and in unifying physics. It's not like it's not there. It's just that it's part of the mechanics of physics when they're dealt with appropriately. So you don't have to invent matter that doesn't radiate or whatever, like the mass is correct. Because the gravitational effect is better understood. And then so basically, and then at the quantum level, the quantum level really started, the standard model really started with almost 21 different free parameters. So right away you got some serious patchwork.
Rubber mallets.
And the standard model started with like a couple of good physicists drinking beer in a bar and coming up with something like a little wild, and then not thinking it was going to stick, and then it did. And so it's really kind of patchwork, and that's why it's very difficult to unify the forces because there's some fundamental principles that are missing. And but when you rectify that, you see, when you'll see my new paper, you will find that actually I used what was already present. Like most of the stuff was already present in the formalism. It just hadn't been put together in the correct,
Yes.
format, so that it would work together. Basically, for instance, fluid equations or gravito-electromagnetic equations, or thermodynamic equations, or mechanical, like Newtonian forces equations, and so on, like needed to be arranged in such a way that it made a whole, that it made like a continuous mechanism that you could find at all scales. And so all the information, all the formalism was done by great physicists before me. And, I just basically put it together. Of course,
you can say it was a
little bit of time.
Unfinished Rubik's Cube. It's all there. Right. It's all there in the Rubik's Cube. Everything is there that's needed. It just needs someone to say, no. What if you put this here and that there and spin this around, and now it
exactly
fits. And that takes a particular kind of I don't believe in genius. Used to tell my piano students that. I say, no, don't think you have to be a genius to do this. You are a genius. We are all it. If we are back home, if we are in our ultimate consciousness, we are all it, and we know everything, and we are the ultimate genius. Genius is just what we call people who've got there a little bit ahead of us. That's what I believe about it. But it takes that particular kind of ingenuity, let's say, instead, to put it together in the right way and go, hey, look. No one thought of that. Look at that.
Right.
Which is what interests me about the thing that I have broached, and I want to just return to before we close, which is the idea that again, if it's all scalar, we completely can understand the idea that you don't mock a 3-year-old in kindergarten because she doesn't understand trigonometry yet. Oh, you're 3 years old and you haven't done that yet? I mean, right?
The new generations, you never know, though.
All right. But the point being, there are going to be, even on Earth, higher levels of professors or just intuitive philosophers or whoever, musicians or hermits in the woods who know more than you do because they've spent the time figuring it out. And then beyond that, there's extraterrestrial life or life in other areas that is going to come and say, let me help you with this a bit. Let me nudge you in that way. I know it just looks like it's just a simple crop circle, but just investigate it. Why did I make that? Why did I use that farmer's track line? Just check it out, And when you do, I mean, this is how I felt anyway. I felt so blessed and so loved is slightly too strong a word, but cared for, nurtured, like a teacher would nurture you, saying, okay, come on, now you're almost there. Now what if you do that? Because they are obviously at a level that is so... But it was made simple, and I drew that square there for you so that you'd see something that you wouldn't normally think of if all you saw was a vesica piscis, because you don't normally see a square in a vesica piscis. And now check out what that means. Oh, it's musical. Oh, but it's no, because music isn't, and you put it all together and you go, now does it make sense to you, to me, to anybody that would sort of miraculously provide you with this number 84 blah, blah, blah.
The value for the radius, the proton.
And and yet you go to the Great Pyramid and it's there in the simplest relationship.
Right.
I want to show you one more from the Great Pyramid. Only one, because it's my favorite. Back to the green screen here. You got literally, this is, again, back to the basics of just taking ratios. That apothem, height and diagonal, 2 corners and an apothem. It gives you that. Do they recognize that number?
Mm-hmm.
That's the reduced Planck constant to
Right.
What's the ratio? 99.99996% accuracy. Why
Right.
would that be? Why would that work out to be that? It's also on the cover of the Sonnets, by the way. And so I mean, I won't go there ad libitum, but it's just somebody knows these things. Who's a teacher? Who's going? Come on, little boy. Come on, little girl. You're doing well. Come along. Look at that. Try that.
Right.
I mean, why would that? And yes, the naysayers will say, well, that's just
I remember that feeling that you're describing when I was in the 90s, early 90s. I was discovering crop circles as a result of my meeting with Greg Braden.
Right.
And
oh yeah.
20 years ago, actually, we just celebrated that together, giving a talk together a few months ago, and it was I was unaware of crop circles at the time, and just as I inspired you to study them, he inspired me to study them. The first crop circle that was not just a circle had emerged. It was the Barbary castle crop circle, which was famous at the time. That was a tetrahedron with little spheres on each corners that had different symbols in it. And I thought that was really interesting because I had just finished, concluding that the structure of space-time had to be tetrahedral in nature. The right angled triangle that are in special relativity, all the kinds of things that you see in physics, and then what was being shown in the crop circles, it really felt like that, just like you described, like here's a clue, here's a little hint, and check it out, calculate, check it out, see what happens. And certainly it was really inspiring at the time, and it definitely influenced me to continue to study geometry at a deeper level, especially when the patterns became so outrageously complex and large, some of them being the size of football fields and larger, and being accurate with very, very high level of accuracy. And so that definitely encouraged me to continue to study them. Of course, it was very, very, very controversial. It still is. And however, it's less so since the Pentagon has admitted to extraterrestrial ships being in our airspace.
It's opening up, isn't it? It's just...
Yes, and as well, the media and so on, and the discussions that's occurring from military personnel and all this that are clearly saying that these are not, earthbound ships, and that they are, capable of things that that are not, of human technology level, and so on. So this is, the idea that they might have left a few, drawings along the surface of the planet to help the little humans move forward is not completely outside, reasonable thinking. And so, I was very interested at the time. I knew that there was a whole lot that were hoaxed, but it was definitely all the studies I could do, all the investigation I could do. I was investigating with some of the scientists at the early times of crop circles. They were in England, I was not, but I was definitely, discussing it with them and discussing, the results of the analysis of the hay, and how it, or the crops, how they were bent, and that little burn that is found at the bent, and
Sure.
and then as well the little fusion
Nodules.
of minerals that is found in the dirt where the crop circles are made, and all these things. So all this was really, really interesting. That was very difficult to explain by Doug and Dave, drinking moonshine and going out there with like their plank, which was at one point what was said was done. Like Doug and Dave came forward, and there was a big media thing, and they were the ones making crop circles. So, I was very interested, and but I've not, been steep in studying it for the last maybe 15 years or 10 years. And so it was funny. I just thought, oh, that's interesting. That looks like an eclipse. I just shared it on our research thread, and you picked it up, and you came back at me with what you had found, which is a remarkable thing. Like, you have this amazing capacity to see patterns and extrapolate the math, in a beautiful way. Because I think coming from your music perspective,
it comes from music, particularly jazz. You're taught obviously pattern recognition with a classical music background, but there's nothing like improvising rather complex jazz to teach you to walk on a tightrope, to not be afraid of falling off. When you do fall off, pretend you meant to. Play a few things that you sound wrong
Dust
to you.
yourself and keep walking.
Do it again and turn it into something. One of the things that touches me about this, I don't know if I will do more of them. I'm too busy for finishing the resonance course, obviously, but it was fascinating to me, and one of the beautiful touches that really hit me hard was, the other thing is they choose a medium that harms no one. The tiniest little irritation might be, they ruined my crops, but we're beginning to find out that actually no, they've given you something in the soil there that would actually multiply your crops if only you would use it. I mean, there's a lot of study gone into that, but it's almost like this the Lama's sand what do you call them?
Sand mandalas.
Mandalas. It's a beautiful piece of work. It's made with such care, and then throw it in the ocean because everything passes. Don't be attached to it. Well, it's done on the ground, and it eventually goes back into the soil. It's got this other aspect to it. So the one question that I asked you, which I want to ask you again in public now, but I asked you at the time because I know that we don't have time to go into this in depth, but I felt like going there. I could feel it. I could feel the guy. I could feel it. I'm not ashamed to say it. I could feel that I was being guided by whatever or whoever made that to say, here, yes, you're right. Now look at this. Now look at that. I made a couple of mistakes, sure. No, not there. Check out this. And then you find suddenly it comes together with this perfection of bing, and you go, that is so beautiful, So why not? Just as that was a clear collaboration in the most tender sense, really. I'm just going to take this one line that you made, and I'm going to turn it into a work of art, because it's going to say so much if I orient the circles at 7.5 degrees to the line of this tractor that you made and make tangents with it. I mean, that is just mind-boggling, but so touching. It's just, you are helping me with my art. Yes, I'm helping you with your art, and it's science. It's art and science. It's alchemy. It's the same. Right. It's all the same thing. It's all the same one thing.
It's all one thing.
And so if that's the case, do you ever ask directly for that help. Yeah, because I started. I mean, I ask anyway. I ask my divine guidance. I ask my guru. I ask in meditation. But I actually asked those beings. Not that I know who they are, but I asked. I said, you obviously care. You're not this bugaboo that the government wishes us to think is going to come and attack the planet. So let's have even more military industrial complex to fight them, which is right. We know that's part of what Werner von Braun said. Yeah, that's coming next on his deathbed. Let's make them be, and all the movies are all about that, right? Oh, look at them, they're blowing up the White House, and Will Smith will save the day.
Well, that's the thing. I saw different comments from other scientists about the high probabilities, the high probability of life in other solar system inside even just one galaxy is so crazy high that like for sure it's happening. And however, that it's best not to try to reach out to any of them because they might attack us. I would suggest that there's a flaw in that logic, and that flaw is that if a society is self-destructive and destructive in nature, the universe, the fact that they could evolve far enough to be able to cross large distances inside the galaxy is very doubtful. And if they can cross large distances in the galaxy, then there's a good chance that they're benign because they can have pretty well anything they want at any point. Exactly. And there's plenty of planets as we have discovered that are inhabitable. Actually, some of the sensors that I saw in 2013 were already at like 40 billion, planets that are in the Goldilocks zone where, the temperatures are acceptable for life to emerge. So that number, like the idea that if you can travel that long of a distance, hopefully it's because you've learned enough of the lessons and you don't need to invade worlds.
Yeah, you're not doing that to empire build.
Yes.
It's not
empire building is over. The empire building time is over. There's pretty well an infinite amount of resources and an infinite amount of surfaces to live on. And so if you have gravity control, that is, if you can travel at even close to the speed of light, you can see fairly large region of your environment, large enough that you can provide at least enough material for any civilization you want. And then superluminous is very plausible in using wormholes, and those are consequences of Einstein field equations, and they're fairly solid, and they're demonstrated at the quantum level by entanglement. And we've already succeeded in moving photons through entanglement and transferring information from a satellite to the surface, using entanglement. A photon is a particle of light, it eventually becomes an electron, which eventually becomes an atom, and then eventually it becomes, a ship going across the universe. So
spooky, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Spooky, isn't it?
Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it. But we're starting to understand it. Of course, unification theory gives the mechanism on how to do that. This is really important to understand. Of course, when you get gravity control, it's not the first thing you do is open a huge wormhole and jump in it. you initially most likely, are able to colonize your solar system much easier, because with rocketry, it's not really plausible at all, not even close. And like that should be known better, because mathematically, like what is being attempted, even with just Mars, is actually not feasible with rocketry. And gravity control is really the way to do it. And of course, it's the way that a society would evolve. What I mean by gravity control is that we've built a whole society based on controlling electromagnetic fields, right? We learn to produce electricity, we learn to use electromagnetic field to communicate and all this. There's another step in the evolution of a society where you understand how to use gravity, because you understand gravity at a more fundamental level, and now you know what mechanism you have to use to alter the local gravitational field. And so, this is something that clearly, according to the Pentagon now, has been achieved by other civilizations. And, and so, we're kind of like growing to that place, and there's growing pains, but I'm confident that this birthing of humanity into this next level is imminent. And I think we're at the 9-month gestation period, last minute, growing pains, last few years. And I think the world we're going to live in the next decade is going to be vastly different than the one we live in now, in terms of the way we produce energy and the way we transport ourselves, and our capacity to have outreach into space and so on. I think all that's going to change very dramatically.
Yeah. And
it has to. If it doesn't, we're just not going to make it.
No, exactly. Well, it's what His Holiness said to us, wasn't it? I mean, he literally gave us our marching orders and was very, very enthusiastic about that. Also, he wouldn't have had lunch with us for 4 hours. I mean, he's got better things to do, and he actually said, go and teach this, do this, move forward, because you've got the capability. Well, I'm extrapolating here a little bit, but I mean, clearly the message was, this work is important, and we have got the possibility, if what you say is true, and it is, if there's that much energy in one cubic centimeter of space, well, there is no problem, there's no lack, but there needs to be the will to overcome the old way of doing things and drop that greediness that has brought us in a downward spiral. But it can be done, and it will be done, and I'm sure that's why you do your work. It's why
at the end of the day, if all of a sudden we have almost an infinite amount of energy and transportation available to us, the stress of limited amount of resources and limited amount of space goes away.
Yeah.
And that reduces the chances for, conflict and difficulties on the planet significantly. And so it really is an opportunity for humanity to unify. And so, this is really kind of interesting, because in some ways it's like a mirroring of the level of consciousness that's wanting to emerge, right? A level of consciousness that's wanting to emerge where humans are all unified as the human race, and there's no more, there's minimum amount of separation in terms of our concept of each other, right? Because of different races, the different colors of skin, different. And so, the realization that the Earth is very small in the universe, and in the galaxy alone, it's really, really small, not visible clearly. Not even the sun is visible at the galactic level. It's too small. But so that like we're one thing is like the first inkling into unification in understanding the fundament, and the physics are coming to support that. That's what's beautiful, is that the understanding and the physics are coming to support that. Yes, everything is connected. Yes, it's one thing acting as one thing, and and that one thing is a beautiful, insanely nonlinear, amazing thing. I was studying Penrose tilings the other day. I don't know if you studied them, but it's so incredible that with just two tiles, two shapes, you can tile a pattern that will never repeat to infinity. And so that you can imagine that, like, you're part of this infinite nature of creation, and that you have just an amazing opportunity to participate in something remarkable, and you matter literally, and that it's so important to make that realization, both individually and as a society, to develop technologies that are very productive for humanity as a whole, that harmonize humanity with the natural world, because these technologies now represent a better comprehension of the mechanics of the natural world, and so then it's much easier to harmonize with it as we flow with it, literally, and it's really an amazing transformation and opportunity.
Beautifully said, Nassim. I really, well, first of all, I know that our audience today will have felt the wisdom of what you've shared with us, and I hope some of the actual optimism of it, because that's what we need. We need more people to generate that same hope and optimism, because that's all it really takes. It's infectious whichever way we think. We start moaning and groaning and whining, everybody around us starts feeling that and start moaning. I mean, we understand that, right? I mean, if you are shining a light into the world, it's very, very powerful. It is powerful enough to effect change. We see that, we know that from all the great ones who have come here to move us forward. It only takes one. I mean, really, it truly does. That it's not as though the world has been absolutely teeming with great personalities, but the power of a few who can convince the rest of us dullards who can say, wow, yeah, go, man. We can do it together, and like you said, we must. And in fact, the Dalai Lama told us exactly that. He said, well, it's got to be, because in 70 years this planet will be uninhabitable if it goes on at its present rate, and we know that. And just like any great story, I think there's a twist coming somewhere. I don't think it's a disaster movie. I think we're going to survive and get through and go, oh yeah, what if we did do what Nassim says, and what if we did use this?
But it's all up to each individual.
It's up to everybody.
It's all up to each individual to make that commitment.
It is.
Yeah. Yep. And it's powerful when people do.
Well,
because every individual is such a powerhouse. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, did you hear about that test that was invented for NASA? NASA came to two doctors. I forget the doctors' names. They wanted them to develop a simple test that could be applied to find out how prospective employees were, how brilliant they were on a scale. Could they effect change? In other words, what they call genius level. And they manufactured this test, and NASA said, wow, this is tremendous. It really helps us to identify those qualities in a person. Now we're hiring people who really, really contribute. So the doctors took this test. This is all real. You can look it up. It's not a made-up story. But they said, I wonder if this test is so simple, we should run it a lot to 4 and 5 year olds. And they took about 26 or 2,700 4 and 5 year olds, gave them this test, and marked how many of them, just asking them simple questions, how many of them were what they call genius level. Do you know what the number was for 4 and 5 year olds?
I bet it was pretty high.
It was 98% were considered. 98% of 4 and 5 year olds were considered full of genius and brilliant ideas. They did the same test to the same kids 5 years later, and it was down somewhere around 60. Another 5 years, it was down to 30%.
Oh.
In other words, we educate the genius out of our children.
Yes,
by
making them I've been saying that for a while. Yeah.
Making them conform to standardized testing, and don't think outside the box, right? You all could be little Steve Jobses and Einsteins and Picassos, and right. Picasso himself said, well, all kids are painters, they just get it taught out of them, right?
Yes.
That's the thing. And so, yes, we all have it. Stop with the stupid, ridiculous educational system that we've got would be a good start.
But it's improving. It's improving. It's much better. Well, it's improving.
Yeah. True.
I guess in certain region it's improving.
Yes. So anyway, one last thought before we close, and I just want to thank you for sharing with us your very valuable time, because I know that had we not commandeered you today, your paper would have been finished next weekend. So I'm sorry, people, for having delayed him again. We're all waiting with bated breath to see it. But no, I don't have a last question. I just have I just want to say thank you. It means a lot. It's lovely to share these.
It's really, really great to have spend that time with you. Anytime break from the paper, I'm happy to have it talking with you. It's remarkable what you have produced. I'm always amazed every time I look at your presentations and I see the relationships, and it blows my mind. So I'm super excited about the course you're going to put on our platform, because I'll be the first one to look at it. And I thank you so much for having me, and for being able to discuss this. And I thought it was fun that you used the chess board, which is 64, for the layout of the course with 64 lessons.
All for you.
Yes. And well, that
I know
it just happens to be the value of the holographic mass ratio.
I know.
In which exactly the relationship is 64 inside to 64 on the surface, just past the Planck length, the first black hole. And so that was just beautiful. I can't wait to see those lessons and learn.
Well, it goes deeper than that. There's other reasons for having put it out on the chessboard, but you'll see. We'll all see. But it's a beautiful mathematical thing as well, and it's played out on a chessboard, so everybody can look at that. But thank you, Nassim. Really, you share such beautiful thoughts and wisdom. We all appreciate the life of dedication, because that's what it is. I joked in the pictures at the beginning because I didn't want to appear too gushing to say, and he spent all it. But the point was that you did, and to produce work of worth, that's almost a necessary prerequisite. You have to literally be self-effacing and do the work first. Otherwise, you can have minor little blips of success in various things. You get a good idea, make it this, that. But to develop your soul and your mind and your heart to where this is not just work that you do. It's you could not do anything else. It's passion.
Right. It's a way of
what you
life.
must do
You know?
to serve
Yeah,
the planet.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
it's
to
the
contribute.
and it's the reason you came here. I mean, it's not an overstatement. It's the reason that great souls come on earth to say. And again, not great souls, great souls. There's no great souls, but there's greatly developed souls, right? And we all eventually become our true potential. But
We all do our journey, and we all contribute. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
So
an amazing thing. So
thank you deeply.
thank you so much for having me. It's so great to have been with you during this time, and I look forward to the next time. And yeah, I mean, I think if for the young people out there, just keep putting a foot in front of the other. You know, I used to be a mountain guide for many years, and the first thing I taught when I brought people in the mountains that were not mountaineer, you know, that were not professional mountaineer, is that I taught them how to walk, you know, and because we've all learned how to walk, but when we get in the mountain, there's a certain rhythm, there's a certain way that we walk in such a way that you establish a rhythm and you keep the rhythm and you keep the focus, and you know, you keep putting a foot in front of the other, and it gets really hard sometimes when you're you know, in altitude, you're running out of oxygen, you're on an arete, there's a blizzard coming down, you know, you're stuck, whatever, like, but you just keep putting a foot in front of the other, and you get there, and you know, you will get there, and the important part is that every time you make a step in front of the other, is that you're completely committed to it. You're completely committed to that step, and your commitment is unwavering, you know, and that is the source of you know, any excellence in athletic performance, or you know, in any other you know, investigation or endeavor. And so I appreciate so much that you brought that out today. I don't speak about that so often, and I appreciate your appreciation for it. And it's been such an amazing journey, It's hard to describe. People say you have to write a book about it, because I tell them little bits here and there, and they go, oh my God, each one of those stories is a book. But you know,
get the paper finished first.
Yeah.
Get the paper finished first, then they will be knocking your door down to ghostwrite your book for you.
Yes. The problem is that I'm going to have to sit beside the ghostwriter for every step.
I know, I do know, but it does take a good editor. Believe me, I know, because I've been trying to write my book for all my life, and it hasn't worked yet. So
ain't finished.
It ain't finished until the fat lady sings.
Okay.
Well, so let's go. You said it. You matter until you multiply yourself by the speed of light squared, and then you energy.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. So good to be with you.
Yeah.